We're going to do something a little different today. Something I ran across this week on YouTube was a video. The video was titled, Atheist Scientist Challenges Christian Apologist Ravi Zacharias. And I watched the video and it annoyed me, and I thought, I want to share this. I want to take this video, break it down, and demonstrate like what is wrong with this. So I'm going to make sure actually I have the right video up. Okay, there we go.
Hello, Mom.
There we go. Oh, it's going to be a problem. Okay. There we go. Now I've got it up. Isn't that beautiful? So, just starting out. There's something about apologetics I don't like. And let's just start by watching the video, parts of it. We're going to pause it and go through the whole thing.
My name is Ethan Kaiser. I am a scientist and an atheist. And my question is, since the Bible has been scientifically disproven as far as all the claims, the theory of evolution, archaeology, Noah's Ark, Adam and Eve, since we know this didn't happen because of our science nowadays, my question is, how do we have, according to the Bible, how do we have free will if God is this omniscient being that knows everything about us, everything we will do, and he pretty much knows our outcome before we're even created? So he creates us knowing everything we'll do. Since we can't surprise him by our actions, we have no free will. Our choices have been predetermined, and that the act of judgment is completely immoral because he knows what we're going to do. Nothing can surprise him. That's my question.
Okay, you notice he asks, it's kind of two parts to this question. The second part really doesn't follow from the first part. Basically saying, well, because of evolution and science, we know that things like Noah's Ark never happened, and so how can God judge the world? So there's a disconnect there. And the apologist will do a pretty good job answering. He does a rather masterful job answering. And I want you to hear. I wrote down some points of interest. I want to hear his initial response to this question. We're going to answer his question for the apologist, because the apologist does not really answer the question. All the apologist really does is throw the question back in the questioner's face. And this is what I don't like about apologetics sometimes, because apologetics is sometimes a bit of a game. It's a bit of a dishonest game. It can become that. I mean, I'm not saying all apologists are dishonest. I was served well by an apologist, coming to me and explaining the Trinity. He's an apologist in another realm of things, but there's something about apologetics I dislike, because, well, let's look at how Zacharias answers this question initially.
Thank you for the question. And before you go into an auditorium, if you give a sheet of paper and ask us to write 20 possible questions, that'll come. We've never heard a new one in all of these years that go by. They're pretty much the same questions. It's
right there. We've never heard a new question in 25 years. It's pretty much the same questions. So what you're going to get is a formula. He's going to return the question in the form of that he has learned through his study in apologetics. Apologetics is the study of like making a defense, self-defense, defending Christianity from attacks. But on several fundamental levels, like I said, he does not really answer the question. What he does is he throws the question back at the guy. And I'm sure we have a fundamental difference in our interpretation of the scriptures. But the way in which he does it is probably dishonest, since he knows there is such a thing as deterministic Christians. There are whole denominations of people who believe in determinism on some level. And to treat the question as if it has no basis in reality in terms of Christianity, like, oh, this is not our question, this is your question, which is, I'm getting ahead of what he says. But he's not going to honestly address the question. Is God morally justified in judging people in that he's all-knowing? The guy asked the question in terms of God's omniscience and God's role as creator. But what I dislike is that he starts off by saying, hey, your question is nothing new. In a sense, that's a sort of a condescending thing to say. I've heard this question before. I've been tempted to say that. I've seen people like you all the time. It's a way of degrading your opposition. You say like, you think you've got a new hard question for me. I've taken this question for 25 years. And so, Zacharias in this clip is going to win. He's going to win a rhetorical victory. But he's not in any ways connected with this person as far as I'm concerned, unless it's through deceiving him. Now, what he goes on next, and I guess we're going to listen to this, is in the next section, he basically he deconstructs, he does a good job of, he does address every point this guy makes. Well, not every point. No. He doesn't. He addresses the two general questions. Well, first there's the assertion that science has just disproven the Bible. And the way he deals with this question, from 1 minute and 6 seconds to about 1:44, is basically to make an appeal to authority. So, well, John Polkinghorne, the noted physicist, who was, at Cambridge University, he came to a different conclusion than you based on the same evidence. And I honestly don't know who John Polkinghorne is. I haven't heard of him. I think the name sounds vaguely familiar. But what does that, let's say I haven't heard of him and I don't even, what's that mean to me? Let's let him answer.
It's interesting that you began by saying as an atheist, all of this has been disproved, and so you live with scientific materialism as your worldview. I studied under John Polkinghorne at Cambridge University. You probably know the name. One of the world's leading quantum physicists who came to exactly the opposite conclusion you did while being the dean at Queen's College, Cambridge, as a quantum physicist, taking the same data you did. So obviously, for a man of his intellectual ability to come to a different conclusion, one would either have to say he's totally stupid to come to that conclusion, or else his empirical basis. Please don't keep shaking your head. Let me finish.
But see, I can see the guy sitting there. No, because there's a great difference between, I don't know what Polkinghorne's thoughts are, but Zacharias is not making this conversation happen in a way that's effectual, because the scientist guy, when he talks about Noah's flood not having happened, he's talking about the geological record. Now, he just said Polkinghorne was a theoretical physicist. So, the idea that a theoretical physicist has the authority to make a, what would you call it? So, to make an authoritative scientific statement about geology. Because the question of Noah's Ark, of whether it actually happened, is a geological question as far as science is concerned. And this is an interesting thing, because Zacharias is saying, oh, you're a scientific materialist. Well, this other guy who disagrees with you, he looked at the materialist stuff, the material, the geology, or what, I don't know. How do you determine whether Noah's Ark happened or not? There's only one way. Other than, let's say, blind faith in a fundamentalist interpretation of the scripture. That's one way you could figure it out. You could say, well, the Bible says there was a flood, and I think that must be a literal historical thing that had happened, and whenever it's 4,000 years ago, or maybe you might question the chronology and say, well, actually the flood happened 100,000 years ago, right? This is just hypothetical. Maybe you say, oh, well, I was actually much farther back than that, because I don't trust the genealogies, or you might say, but most people who take fundamentalist interpretations put a lot of trust in those genealogies. But we'll say, 5,000 years ago there was a flood, or or whatever. That's one way you could arrive at the conclusion that there was a flood. What's the other way? The other way would be to go out and look for evidence of the flood in geology, in the stones. Now, whether a theoretical physicist looks at those rocks and says, yeah, I think it was a flood, versus whether what a geologist says. I mean, who's trained in rocks? I mean, I've been looking at that question for a long time. I'm not a geologist. But I find it very difficult to think that the entire globe was covered in water 5,000 years ago. There is evidence that there was water over different parts that almost, I don't know, is there any part of the earth that hasn't been underwater at some point in time? I don't know. I don't even know. I'm not a geologist. I know that, like, where I live, if you go down and dig into the rocks, it's all sea life. And say, aha, there's a flood. Well, you got just tons of sea life. Like, did all the sea life get washed over here and get buried here? Well, there's sea life on the other side of the world, too. And why is it only a particular kind of fauna of sea life? You know, these are questions. And the problem is, if you have the first perspective on truth about the Bible, which is basically, I believe it literally, saying, I believe that this flood literally happened 5,000 years ago, well, then that geological evidence is going to be problematic. And so now there are people who go around studying the geology and try to say, no, there is a flood here. Okay? They say the geology does prove a flood. Problem is, a lot of those people are not considered reputable scientists. They are almost exclusively apologists for a fundamentalist interpretation of the flood story. They are completely invested in that. That is why they are looking at the rocks. And so it's hard for me to understand how they don't have an a priori idea about the flood when they're going to study the rocks. They're saying, well, the flood happened 5,000 years ago. Let's find the evidence. And that's not how science is done. And maybe science is just the wrong approach. Maybe it did happen and whatever. I'm not saying you can still have your fundamentalist interpretation of the Bible, but what problem is they try to marshal. See, while Zacharias at one point is criticizing this scientist guy, I forgot, Ethan, I think his name was, we'll see again, but he's criticizing him for his materialism. But at the same time, he's using materialism and saying, well, materialism totally supports my point of view. So there's a disconnect here of argument. Like, he's saying, the guy's saying, well, materialism says there was no flood. Adam and Eve didn't happen. I don't know how materialism says Adam and Eve didn't happen, unless you say, well, Adam and Eve didn't happen 6,000 years ago. And because you could say, well, archaeologists have gone out and found evidence of human, let's say, settlements and stuff in different parts of the world going back tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. They found evidence of human beings much farther back, and then the creationists will come along and say, oh, no, you're misinterpreting the archaeology, because this all has to be literally true. And I've been observing this for years. Since when I was a teenager, I had a book called The Collapse of Evolution, and it was all about how the Earth was young and all that. And I remember reading it and stuff, and then later on finding out, like, oh, everything in there, most of the evidence they were saying for a young Earth is actually not true what they were saying. Like about moon dust being this deep and all that. There was a lot of things they were saying. It was either based on outdated information, or it just wasn't true, or it was whatever, or it was not scientific. The problem is that you want to take on the mantle of science. You then take on that burden of that standard. Now, the way I would have answered this guy's question about Genesis, I'd say, well, you say it didn't happen, but if something didn't happen, now, I believe man is God's creation, okay? And the story, and on a fundamental level, the story of Adam and Eve is true, and the story of Noah is true. Whether or not it is historical is another question. And I have always defaulted to the position that I believe there was a flood. I believe the Bible. But on the other hand, I know that the evidence for it happening 5,000 years ago is, I think, just about zero. And whether or not it happened even farther back or something like that, I don't know. I have a default sort of like, I kind of believe it's true. You say, Paul, you kind of believe it's true? Don't you absolutely believe it? No, I don't absolutely believe it's true. I absolutely believe the Bible was inspired, though, and that the men of the Bible had an intimate relation with God, and thereby they wrote things that were true. Well, how can it be true yet not historical? Well, like all the parables of Jesus. They were true, but they weren't historical. They weren't like the part about the sower went forth to sow, and some seed fell by the wayside, and some fell among thorns, and some fell on the path, and some fell on good ground. Now, maybe that happened somewhere, but Jesus was not referring to it as a historical event. Same thing with the thing about Noah's flood. Noah's flood is totally true, I believe. And now, you can't prove or disprove this scientifically, or maybe you can, through empiricism. But according to what God inspired the writer of Noah to say, who wrote that part of Genesis, chapter 6, that the whole world was filled with violence, and the thought of the hearts of men was only evil continually. And God said, I am grieved that I have made man, so I will destroy man. So the question is this true? That if we fill the world with violence, and the thoughts and imaginations of our hearts are only evil continually, is God going to come down and punish us? That's a question. Will he send forth a flood? Now, after the flood, it was promised that there would never be another flood. But there have been many things like floods. And that in any place, look at Sodom and Gomorrah, it's the same story, just a little more localized. That city was given over to violence. It's not just that they were, like I've said before, when the angels came to Sodom and Gomorrah, they didn't walk into the town and then they saw there was a wedding and there were two men involved in a wedding, which is still just absolutely wrong. But it's not the sort of thing they were like, okay, let's rain fire and brimstone right now. Boom. No. Before that, they'd already promised Abraham that for the sake of a righteous man or so many righteous men, they would spare the city if there could be some righteousness found in it. And it was that the men of the city came to the door and they wanted to rape the angels, which I think I think most homosexuals would agree that men raping men is evil, right? I would hope so. I mean, otherwise you're perpetuating a stereotype about your own immorality. That's evil. What was done in Sodom and Gomorrah, I think everyone can agree, was terrible. And the men of that city were terrible. They were given over to violence and perversion. And so their destruction came. If we give ourselves over to evil thoughts and evil deeds, our society will be destroyed. And de Tocqueville noticed this when he came to America. He said, America is great because America is good. If America ever ceases to be good, it will cease to be great. So the stories of the Old Testament are true on a very important level. They are morally true. The story of Noah teaches us something important. That we cannot let evil reign in the world, or it will be the end of us all. We even know this. I mean, scientists, don't you know? I mean, we have nuclear weapons. If we don't sort out the world and make it so that if righteous men, they say all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to sit silent. You know what a nuclear war would do to the world? It'd be like Noah's Ark again. There'd just be a few of us left. So don't tell me it's not true. That's what I would say to the scientist guy. Because the most important lesson of Noah's Ark is not that there was a scientific event. You know what I mean? That, there was a flood and you can go down in the rocks and look, it's true. And I'm just saying, like, I want it to be true. I want the story of Noah to be true. Because then I could say, look, it's right there in the ground. You can dig anywhere and you find just the mingled bodies of mammals, dinosaurs. You find fish. They're all just smeared together in a massive pile of Honestly, if there was a flood, everything that was alive that got killed in the flood should be deposited probably in one massive mat of dead things. Well, maybe that's wrong. But there would be lots of places like that. In fact, there was a guy, and I don't know how credible he is. I remember watching him. I used to subscribe to his newsletter. I forgot why I stopped getting it. And he had like an ebook, and it was kind of cheap and chintzy, but basically claiming, there are places you can go around on the earth and you find these chasms filled with the bodies of all kinds of mammals and fish, and like they were all thrown in there like in a flood. And there are different interpretations of the flood that kind of take away from it. I mean, the story sounds global. People say, well, maybe it was a local flood. Maybe, but then the story becomes a bit of an exaggeration. In my opinion, the flood is based on collective experiences of humans. Understanding that we cannot fill the world with evil and expect to survive. We cannot give ourselves over to violence and evil thoughts. Some people think, I've heard this from atheists, and thoughts are it's harmless. Christianity teaches, and this is also true, and I cannot prove it scientifically, but it is true, that out of the heart proceed forth the evils of men. Therefore, what goes on in your heart is essential to keeping the world from being destroyed. And then eventually, that may be ultimately unavoidable. All right, so he gives his little appeal to authority. The guy starts to object. No, let me finish. Let's let him finish.
You can come and talk afterwards, so allow us to concentrate what we are saying here. I want to read for you what David Berlinski says.
Now, David Berlinski, fascinating guy. He's going to explain who he is. I've watched a lot of his videos. He's real interesting. If you want to listen to a non-believer just rip on evolution, he's your guy. And I admit he's somewhat influential on me. I generally I don't like to argue about evolution because everyone thinks it's true, as far as like so many people, right? I mean, I could go to my insulated world of just Christians and find a lot of people say, yeah, evolution and blah, blah, blah. Well, then it becomes a boring subject. We all agree. We none of us think it's something that happened. But on some level, like you look at the creatures that have been on the world over time, if you think geology is in any way an honest record of God's work in the world, if there's any truth to it, to geology, well, then we can see the creatures that have lived on the earth have changed over time. There's some sort of thing, and there's some sort of evolutionary process. Meaning, like, look what we've done with dogs. Creatures can change. It's never been demonstrated that a creature can change from one thing to another, but a lot of people believe this. And my general practice is, like, I don't like to get into it with them because I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm willing to just play along, and I do that a lot. I play along like, oh yeah, evolution, sure. Because to me, it's just like, as soon as you just drop the subject and like go around it, nobody wants to talk about it. Like I've had plenty of atheists say to me like, well, do you believe in evolution? What's your opinion about, well, I don't really question it. which I realize that's the last thing I said to someone, and realize that's not an entirely honest reply. What I should say is I don't want to question it. I don't want to get into it because I want to talk about God or about fundamental ideas like truth. What is truth? What is true? I want to, if we're going to talk about religion, I don't want to talk about it in terms of evolution versus religion, which is kind of what these apologists do. They set up this like thing where like, well, science is versus religion, and actually this scientist over here agrees with religion, so either he's stupid or or he's misinterpreting the evidence. Well, did he say that? Was that the second option? I certainly think it's the second option. And plus, he's a theoretical physicist. His training is in physics. There's always tons of physics on this. Physicists love God for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of physicists who are believers. And there's probably something about physics that's sort of like, this is just elegant and beautiful. They're not all believers, but there's plenty. It seems like there's a good number of physicists who believe in God. So what? It's not like it's the study of the physical world or of even biology. There's biologists, prominent. One of the most prominent geneticists believes in God. He also believes in evolution. It's not impossible. The two things don't have to be together. I do not believe in evolution, but I listen to people talk about it, and I think there's a lot of interesting things they say about it, and I'm a spectator. That's how I look at it. I am a spectator of these things. I am someone who is concerned with the things of God. I'm a preacher of the gospel. I'm not an apologist. No, I'll do some apologetics, sure. But I don't do apologetics, though. Apologetics are kind of like this specific thing. Like he said, we've heard all the questions before. And so we have all the answers, is the conclusion. I've heard your question before. I've been answering it for 25 years, so I'm going to run rings around you, essentially what he's saying. So now he's going to Berlinski, who's a agnostic, you could say, or almost atheist, you could say. He doesn't believe in God. But he certainly is an honest sort of broker about, well, what can we say about God? What do we know about God? What do we know about science? And as far as science goes, there's a lot of holes in science. People talk about evolution as if it's like this foregone conclusion. I've wanted to sort of ask people, without getting into the God versus evolution, if you want to just talk about evolution, I'd be happy to, as a non-expert. But I'm trying to understand, the processes. These should all be mapped out by now. Kind of like the way you map out chemical reactions. Not just whatever's fittest. I know, yeah, the fittest survive sometimes. You know what I mean? Sometimes the fittest get eaten too. Just because of chance. Well, let's let him. What does Berlinski say? He goes to quoting Berlinski. And again, it's a sort of an appeal to authority. Here's what an atheist says about the questions you're asking. Actually, sort of transitioning. Well, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
About the scientific naturalistic worldview. Do you know who he is? One of the world's leading physicists, who is an agnostic.
Another physicist.
Borders on atheism, but took issue with Richard Dawkins's book, The God Delusion, and wrote a book called The Devil's Delusion.
I always wanted to read that.
Has anyone ever provided proof for God's inexistence? Not even close.
Yeah, I can't prove that God exists. I can provide some evidence, but that's not proof. Right? That's what everyone knows. The Bible. I have the Bible here. That's evidence. It is. It's not very strong evidence for many people. For other people, it's all the evidence they need. But as far as proof goes, because proof is a very strong. When you talk about proof, most scientific things that we call scientific truths aren't even really proven. There's just enough evidence put together that we have a high degree of confidence that it's true. It's very difficult to prove things in an absolute sense.
Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close.
Yeah, has quantum cosmology, proven why the universe is here? Well, or even how? No. Yeah.
Have the sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close.
I'll just say ahead of time, everything that Berlinski says here, I agree with as far as it's all true. For the most part, yeah.
This is Berlinski talking. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything as long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good?
One of the things he said is, has rationalism, before the 20th century, has rationalism provided a moral basis for understanding the world? What he's saying is, rationalism hasn't gotten close enough to telling us what right and wrong is. It's a problem. If you're going to have a materialistic world view, most people, like Richard Dawkins and the guys he mentions, these famous atheists, one of their arguments against religion is that religion is a sort of immoral force. I mean, but then they're sort of immediately they're getting into a realm of like, well, they believe in something moral, something right and something wrong, something good and something evil. Well, on what basis? Well, they would say, well, rationalism. Based on just rational thought, we come to the conclusions about good and evil. Only problem is, no one has ever demonstrated that. Like how you get there. And certainly they've tried to demonstrate it, but they have not demonstrated it correctly, let's say that. Like in a way that is like, oh, of course, that's how you do it. I'm going to back it up just slightly.
Being a force for good, not even close to being close. Is there a...
So 20th century secularism, look at the 20th century, all the war, and it was all... people blame Christianity and stuff for stuff like the Nazis and stuff. It's like, it was a fundamentally secular movement. And like all these 20th century movements, a lot of times people, when they want to motivate common people to take up arms or to fight, they bring in motivations like nationalism or religion. So, it goes back to Machiavelli. If you read Machiavelli, the prince should use religion when it suits him for his ends. And it's not it's not a particularly honest or good, let's say, morally acceptable way someone's sending me a comment on Facebook. So, it's not a very... Machiavelli wrote a very evil book, let me put it that way. About his advice to princes was Machiavellian. I mean, we even call it that because it's like this sort of cold, calculating, wicked approach to the world. And that kind of played itself out in the 20th century. The 20th century was a secular thing. It was where we became less religious. I mean, Nietzsche declared the death of God in the 19th century. And what he meant by that, all that means is that in men's hearts, God has died as a motivating force. And for many men, that is absolutely true. Like, in the world, they make lip service to God, but their faith is dead. I could have played a clip from... I played the clip at the beginning. Because thou art neither cold nor hot, but are lukewarm, I will spew thee out of my mouth. But there's another quote in the book of Revelation there to one of the 7 churches. I know thou hast a name that thou livest and art dead. And so while God himself is fine, he's not touched by our ups and downs. He is what he is and who he is. But in the hearts of men, God has died as a reality for many people. It's like they don't look at, especially in the West, our nations are becoming more and more secular. And is that going to proceed to the conclusion? Well, in a sense, I think it does. It does harm, but then it may result in backlashes. I mean, the thing is, I don't think that some people think like a couple of years ago, there were the New Atheists, as they were called, and they were kind of big, but the movement has kind of petered out, as far as I can tell, to some degree. I mean, it's not a big thing, and counter arguments are rising against it and against its assertions. It's not just a question of unbelief. It's like they're assertions that religion is evil. All religion. I mean, you can have bad religion. Gosh, that's what I'm fighting against all the time. That's what Jesus fought against in his ministry. Let's continue with this. I'm getting distracted.
Narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough.
No,
Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough.
Yeah, narrow orthodoxy. Is there narrow orthodoxy within Christianity? Absolutely. Close enough also. Though there's actually quite a bit of disagreement. That's the funny thing, is like there's a narrow band of things that are considered orthodox. But also there's a lot of, it's funny, there's a lot of leeway to do things and say things. And in some ways there's more freedom. And some might say too much, but I don't know if you can have too much.
Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on.
I like his little face. Yeah, scientific atheism is an exercise in intellectual contempt. Berlinski has a lot of really interesting things to say. Because he's analyzing it. It's like, yeah, it is contempt for people of religious faith that motivates a lot of it. But let's move past this. I don't want to make... it's not Berlinski that I want to talk about. But I have a lot of that to sort of become part of this, and that's fine. It's part of this video. So he makes this great quote from Berlinski. You know, an agnostic bordering on atheism. I mean, he certainly doesn't believe in God by the definition of many atheists. He is an atheist. But so what? Just because an atheist says stuff, or because a scientist says stuff, that doesn't mean anything. What about the guy's question? Well, now he's going to sort of get to the question a bit.
Now, I didn't say that, all right? I'm not quoting myself. Please give me your name, sir. Ethan? Yes. Ethan, what you're wrestling with is not uncommon. Many people from a scientific and materialistic worldview will say what you've said and come to that conclusion.
Okay. Say what you said. What did he say? Well, he made some statements about determinism. And we'll come back to this, 322. But what did he originally say about it, though? Start at 23 seconds. Okay. Right there. What did he say?
Is how do we have, according to the Bible, how do we have free will if God is this omniscient being that knows everything about us, everything we will do, and he pretty much knows our outcome before we're even created. So he creates us knowing everything we'll do. Since we can't surprise him by our actions, we have no free will. Our choices have been predetermined, and that the act of judgment is completely immoral because he knows what we're going to do. Nothing can surprise him.
You know, once we get through this video, I'm going to answer that question specifically and from the Bible. He wanted to know from the Bible, how can this be? And I forgot exactly what number we were on. I think it was about here.
Some reason, which I was unfortunate, I think. At Cambridge, I listened to a talk at the Lady Mitchell,
Let me hear.
Your application could have gone in many different directions, but you came to that one for some reason, which I was unfortunate, I think. At Cambridge, I listened to a talk at the Lady...
Yeah, that's picking up pretty much where we left off. Application of the idea of determinism.
The problem is what you mispositioned was from a scientific and materialistic worldview. Will say what you've said and come to that conclusion.
All right, here's
the problem is what you mispositioned was...
What you mispositioned...
Your concern between determinism and free will.
What he's saying is, you're concerned about... He's delegitimizing the question. He's saying you're concerned about determinism and free will. You've mispositioned it. How did he position it? He positioned it as a biblical question. And this is what I dislike about this Ravi Zacharias video, and it makes me kind of not like him. Because he's saying, well, it's not a problem because the idea of free will, as far as the teaching of the idea of free will, as far as ordering the universe around it, as many Christians do in their philosophical, because it is a philosophically comfortable position to take up. Free will. Believing in free will, it's sort of like they base a lot of things around it, like say, well, why does God do this? They say, well, because of free will. Free will is a great get-out-of-jail-free card a lot of times for apologists. And he's saying, you've mispositioned this question. And then what he's going to go on to do, and we're going to let him do it, he's just throwing it back in his face. It's your problem. So, and he never answers this question because he's saying, it's not my question to answer. It's your problem. It's your worldview. It comes out of your secular, no, not secular, your atheistic, scientific, empirical worldview is what is causing you to have this problem with determinism. It's not God's fault. Even though the guy asked from the Bible, and Zacharias is saying, the Bible, what's the Bible have to do with this? You're saying it's a biblical question. I say it's not a biblical question because I'm a Christian apologist. I represent Christianity. I represent the Bible. But he didn't. He misrepresented the Bible. Because here's the thing. This guy's question is in the Bible. It's answered in the Bible. It is in the Bible. I can take you chapter and verse to it. We're going to go there. And that's what pisses me off. He's using sleight of hand and cunning craftiness and deceit. It makes me mad. And he's a Christian. He's a brother, I guess. But I just don't like this slimy apologetic work. It's slimy. I'm going to throw the question back in your face. And then we'll talk later and have coffee and I'll be your buddy. And free will, free will, free will. It doesn't grapple with the essential question. He refuses to grapple with it. He says, that's for you. I don't grapple with that because we believe in free will. And how do you reconcile free will with the omniscience of God and his role as creator? How do you reconcile those things? I don't have to because of free will. Because the Bible doesn't teach us. Like, I can't go in the Bible somewhere to the place where it explains how free will is reconciled with the omniscience of God. I can only go to the place in the Bible where it says, where it asks the same question that guy asks. I can only go there and see how it says God has determined everything, and here's what we have to say about that. Here's the answer to your question. How is God morally justified in judging the world if he knows everything ahead of time? If he knows everything ahead of time, and he's also the creator, how can he be morally justified in judging the world? That was the guy's question. And what Zacharias does is basically slips out of the question and says, oh, that's not a biblical matter at all. Even though it's in the Bible. Don't believe me? Oh, great. Wrong window. Oh, wait. No. Anyway. That's funny. All right. Transition. All right. All right. Right here in these verses. Verse 19 specifically. Thou wilt then say unto me, and we'll get the context of this a little bit. Why does he yet find fault? For who has resisted his will? And look at the response. Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? So, I mean, there's an answer here which we will analyze. Who has resisted God's will? How can he find fault with us? And then he asks, let's see. Is this also the place where he asked that, or is it earlier? Is there unrighteousness with God? Yeah, right. Verse 14. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? The Bible says no. We'll ask the fundamental question of, well, how? We're going to unpack that. All right? Is there unrighteousness with God? Because that's the guy's question. He answers a serious question that is answered in the Bible, and Mr. Bible apologist, Christian apologist, he's more of an apologist for whatever his take on Christianity is. You know, whether it's a fundamentalist interpretation of Genesis. They're apologizing for that. Apologizing means to make a defense. We use the word apologize differently than, because apologia, comes from Greek. And it has a different meaning when we talk about apologetics. Our word apologize is very far removed from the origin of the idea of apologetics. But it is sort of like, because first an apology is like, well, I'm sorry. Whereas apologetics is sort of like, I'm not sorry. Here's my justification for why I did this. You know what I mean? So making an apology, when I say, like one of my kids does something wrong, if it's accidental, I say, well, then you could say you're sorry, right? And apologize like, I'm sorry, it was an accident, blah, blah, blah. But if you do it on purpose, I'm sorry isn't good enough. Like if I intentionally go and hurt somebody, I don't think an apology is really, I kind of need to be punished. If I intentionally go out with malice of forethought to harm another human, I've transgressed on a level that where an apology is not sufficient. Whereas if let's say I'm walking through the store and I step on someone's foot accidentally, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. And I didn't see you as sort of the apology, like saying, I was not a willing participant in this harm that has come to you. And so apologetics is more along that line. It's the justification for what we believe. And this guy, the scientist guy, his original question, he has asked a biblical question in terms of the Bible. If God is all-knowing, how this, how that, and Romans 9 completely covers that question. Ravi Zacharias, though, slides away from it. And that's slippery. And he knows it's in the Bible. Now, he doesn't agree with my interpretation of Romans 9, as do many Christians, because they, as the fundamentalist imposes a fundamentalist view on the Bible, it makes the Bible fit into that. And then they will go out and take that viewpoint and they'll apply it to science, apply it to geology, cosmology, whatever. They apply that a priori, that before the fact assumption about what the truth should be. They'll apply it to everything. So also, people who believe in free will take the lens of free will and they say, well, how can I cram the Bible into my worldview? Much as he will say, you have this atheistic worldview, they're all about worldview. And they don't consider that, hey, my worldview is coloring my perception of the Scripture. I haven't stripped myself of it. And it's possible to do so, but not absolutely. Because there's always hidden parts of your conscious mind or your subconscious that you can't strip off. But with a certain amount of rigor and desire for honesty and truth, you can strip it away and just look honestly at questions. And if you do that, you might actually find an honest answer. That's the problem with education. Because he was educated at some great university. He's a very intelligent man. This response is brilliant, but it's also wicked. There's a certain wickedness to it, a slippery sliminess to it, which I dislike intensely. I dislike what he's doing. Ravi Zacharias, I love kind of the way he does it. I admire his skill, but I can't, to me, it's like morally reprehensible to answer the question this way. Not just because I disagree, but because he's up on stage, he's giving a performance, he's in front of people, he's basically supposed to humiliate these atheists. And like you said, he's been doing it for 25 years. A lot of atheists lose debates because the apologists are much more skilled at this. Like the atheists, like Richard Dawkins, is a notoriously bad debater because he's a biologist. And if you were having a debate on biology, he'd definitely have more authority and he probably has a lot of knowledge. But then you start debating him on the ideas of religion and philosophy, and the guy's not going to do so well. These guys are trained professionals. They've been studying religion and philosophy their whole lives. Like I've done. I mean, that's what I say. I'm not a scientist. I'm a religious philosopher, or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Whatever you want to call it. No, philosophy sometimes gets a bad name in the Bible. Vain deceit and philosophy and all that. And philosophy can lead you astray. Because that's the point. Is like, he has a philosophy, and it's centered around the idea of free will. And it colors a lot of the way he looks at God. And that is, that kind of leads him astray. And it causes him to, what I will say in a fundamental way, dishonestly answer this question and try to slip out from having to respond to it. And I think that is, to me, that is something like, if I talk about a scripture, I kind of, if I know there's multiple interpretations, or if my interpretation I know is opposed by some other school of Christian thought, I feel like there's some necessity to address it. And to deny that there's not a deterministic strain among Christians, that some Christians believe that God is all-knowing and he is the creator, and therefore we don't have free will, that is believed. Now, my position is a little more nuanced than that. Because, one, well, let's see the way what he does is he gets to this point where he's got him, and he brings him in, he sort of reels him in. And let's just continue with this, because I have a lot more to say about this.
Your application could have gone in many different directions, but you came to that one for some reason, which I was unfortunate, I think. At Cambridge, I listened to a talk at the Lady Mitchell Hall in 1990 by Stephen Hawking. As you know, he can't speak. He uses a speech synthesizer. His whole talk was on determinism and freedom. And you know what he concluded? That the tragedy with scientific materialism, if we take its assumptions, is that we are not free, we are totally determined. That was the world's leading physicist at that time saying, the very thing you're asking of the Christian faith, he pinned on your backs as scientific materialists. You can go right online and trace it. Lady Mitchell Hall, 1990.
So you can go online and trace the idea of determinism back to Lady Mitchell Hall. You know, for Stephen Hawking's talk. Well, I can trace it back to Romans 9. Ephesians 1. It's not materialistic determinism, it's theistic determinism, which was what the question was about. And the guy's problem is actually he framed the question first with an appeal to materialism. And the funny thing is, like I said, Zacharias appeals to the same materialistic evidence to support the Bible. I mean, the stories of the Bible are true because, well, this theoretical physicist says the evidence points to the truth of the Bible and that Noah happened. I mean, he doesn't specifically say that, but the guy said Noah, Adam, and Eve, and because of evolution, blah, 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 none of it can be true. And what he says is, well, and so some other scientist says it is true. Based on what? Based on the materialistic evidence. So, you know, it's putting this sort of like battle between science and religion, but it doesn't have to be a battle. You can just take the questions separately. Like, you don't even have to have a material, like the Apostle Paul, when he wrote Romans, he had no knowledge of scientific materialism. You know, when he talks about the foreknowledge of God. Let's let him continue.
Somewhere around March, April, May, that time, I was in attendance. And he said, the only escape I have is since I don't know what has been determined, I may as well not be. The whole auditorium moaned and groaned with an escape hatch that he gave for himself after telling us that we were completely determined.
I don't know what that means exactly. Like, what did Hawking mean? Since I don't know what's determined, I might as well not be. He's actually getting close to the truth there. Because, and Zacharias doesn't understand this. The guy who's asking the question doesn't understand this. And I don't know anybody who's ever actually, honestly, this is something I say, and no one's ever told me otherwise, but there is a problem of perspective. Like when Einstein talked about relativity, you know, he would talk about a person traveling at the speed of light, and how time would pass differently for them and all that, right? More slowly, the faster you travel. Well, God is omniscient, all-knowing. And therefore, if you are in God's position, you know everything that's going to happen before it happens. You know the end from the beginning. When you're making things, you know how it's going to turn out. And according to the scriptures, it's not just he knows ahead of time. He actually intentionally does things the way he does so that he gets that outcome. So, but I'm not God. I'm not omniscient. So I don't know what's going to happen. And so from my conscious perspective, from my relative position in reality, everything is happening in real time. I don't feel like a puppet on a string. And the truth is, I'm not. It's not about what we are. Determinism is not about what I am, that I'm determined. It's about what God is. And it's almost paradoxical. And I'm going to go deeper into it in Romans. Let's see. Oh, we're up to an hour. We're going to go over an hour. This is special. Let's continue with what he's saying, though. Because we're going to go back to that. There is a problem of perspective. Right? Hawking's touched on that, because when he says that, I don't know what's going to happen, that's significant. And then he says, I might as well not be. Either Zacharias didn't understand what he said, or Hawking's kind of just decided that's the point at which he threw up his hands to fate. Oh, I might as well not be determined, maybe? So in that I don't know what's happened, I'm not really determined what's going to be. I mean, what's going to be is what's going to be. And am I a free agent acting in it? Well, from my perspective, I am all the time. All my decisions I'm making in real time. The fact that God knows about them ahead of time is of zero import to me right now. You know what I mean? To the moral question of what should I do? How God judges me because of that later is another question, which I will address. Because that was his primary question. How does God morally judge that? But I want to completely deconstruct this video because of Zacharias, what he's done in this. And, maybe I'll put in the description, where you can, if you want to just jump ahead to my explanation, I'll put that in there.
That's Berlinski's issue. That is actually
I think he meant Hawking's there.
even what people like Dawkins will concede, or Pinker. You read Steven Pinker and the others. So totally determined. So the question is, were you free to ask this question?
See, now you see his little face there. He knows this is my apologetics moment, where he's gonna make it personal. He say, "Are you free to ask the question?" It's becoming a semantic game. And this is what I dislike about this. It's like this is like rhetorical flourishing of your skill in order to, never mind that question you asked, even though it's in the Bible and you asked a Bible question. I'm gonna talk about atheists. I mean, you can see Pinker and Dawkins and Berlinski and all these atheists say that determinism is a big problem. Everything's determined and blah, 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 blah. And then he says, but are you free to ask the question? Or are you free to, what was it?
This question.
Yeah, are you free to ask the question?
Yep.
I don't believe any of us actually have free will because we are strictly material.
So you're actually, as a machine automaton, asking me this question?
We are.
So again, that's what he's trying to. It's a sense of my question. It's a way of debate by humiliation. So are you an automaton? I don't perceive myself as an automaton. Are you a robot? That's the one I always get. Are you a robot? No, I'm a human. I'm a human. That is so much more complicated than any kind of robot we've ever been able to make. But Why is it in our stories the robots eventually rebel and gain free will and do things we don't expect? Why does that happen? Because we are not omniscient. We know. We know that we can't predict what our robots are going to do. Even though we make robots, we make them robots. Try to give them intelligence, and we can't predict what they're going to do. God, on the other hand, can. Because he's all-knowing. He knows what we're going to do ahead of time. Now, some people who believe in free will may deny that.
All made up of our past experiences.
Okay, but you're not free then. You're not free. You're not.
He's saying, play my game. The guy's just reasserting his belief in determinism, where Zacharias wants him to play this semantic game. Maybe it's not semantic, but it's a bit of a game. Are you free to ask the question? Or are you an automaton answering?
Making a truth statement.
And then that one.
Free. You're not making a truth statement.
You're not making a truth statement. This part of his argument, I really sort of am like, because I love the point where he's about to think he made a point and wait for the applause.
My truth statement. I mean, what I'm saying is our memories and our states.
No. Hear me carefully.
Okay.
If you're totally determined,
Yes.
you're pre-wired to think the way you do.
Nature versus nurture. Yes.
Sorry?
That nature versus nurture was totally unnecessary. Because both nature, if you're talking about determinism, both nature, like you don't have to have a scientific perspective to understand that both nature and nurture, it doesn't matter. It's not just your nature, it's how you're nurtured. And how you're nurtured, you don't have a control over that. It's just you, like I was born into the family I was born in. Someone said this to me, if you were born on the other side of the world to a Muslim family, you'd be that way. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't. So what's the point? I'd have a different perspective. Maybe, plus the fact is I just couldn't be. If I was born on someone else was born on the other side of the world and they have a different perspective. You know what I mean? I'm here. If my mom and dad had intercourse a month later than they did, I wouldn't have been born. Something else would have been born. Probably if they've been minutes later, or if the emission of the sperm had come a minute later or sooner, or what? You know what I mean? Like there was millions of sperm in there, or were millions of sperm, and the one that contained my DNA is the one that got made. It's not like that's going to happen on the other side of the world. It can't. Unless they happen to be on the other side of the world. You know, all these counterfactuals to history. Both nature and nurture are beyond your control. The experiences you have in life, you know, like you're bumping up against other people. I remember David Eagleman did a series on the brain, which I've talked about many times. But he did this part where he had this big glass, I assume it was glass, probably plexiglass or whatever, acrylic or something. This big container, a big cube, and all these mouse traps with ping pong balls set on them. And then the top he would drop in a ping pong ball. And they were saying, well, here's how free will kind of works, because he didn't want to give in to this determinism. Every time I drop the ping pong ball in, it's going to be a little different. And I can't predict it. And that's kind of how we are. We're so complicated that we can't be predicted. Now, we can't predict it because we're not omniscient, but God can. When God drops the ping pong ball, he knows exactly what the reaction is going to be. You know what I mean? Metaphorically, I mean, not metaphorically, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, if God were to conduct that experiment, or if we could get God to cooperate in it, he could tell us exactly how the ping pong balls are going to go like popcorn. You know what I mean? Even though, to us, even though it's a pretty controlled situation, because of chaos, because things are not always in the exact same position at the exact same time all the time, but if we could control for every variable, in that situation, that ping pong balls on the mousetrap situation, if we could control every variable, if we knew what every variable was, if we could control every variable, we could predict exactly how the balls would bounce. Just because you put a complicated system up that we cannot understand does not mean that it's beyond understanding.
Nature versus nurture.
Nature versus nurture.
Yes.
Regardless, the
Good job, regardless.
nurture may provide a different environment, but the nature is you're hardwired
Yes.
to
The nurture is also hardwired. I mean, I put someone in a different environment. Well, that only I can't take myself and say like, well, here's Paul in his current environment, and here in a parallel universe, I have Paul in a different environment. There is no such thing that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe there is a parallel universe where I grew up on the other side of the world and I was born to totally different parents, and it's still somehow me. Except I'm not consciously aware of that. It's just it's an experiment of thought that makes no that is not intelligible to my mind. Like, and I think to any human mind, you cannot. If you're not aware of yourself in another place, then you are not. That is no self there. It's all hardwired. Not just your nature, but your nurturing is also hardwired into, it is embedded in history. It is blocked out. Like your genetic can only come down the way they did. If anything happened in the past differently, you wouldn't be. No, all of us would be gone. There'd just be a different world. But that's not what happened.
come out with a certain conclusion. Out of flux, nothing but flux. What you put into the computer, ultimately is going to come out. But you have to ask yourself, are you making a truth claim?
This part, I just do not get what he's getting at. Are you making a truth claim? Because this is where he scores his big points. Or where we go. Ta-da! All right, here we go.
If you are making a truth claim, you're rising above the bondage of total subjectivity. And the moment you claim a truth claim, you're violating determinism. And so I just leave you with that. And let's meet afterwards. Hey, Ethan, we want to chat with you. You're the kind of guy we come here for. So afterwards, you...
And the rest is all just a lot of manipulative. I call it manipulative friendliness. We come here for guys like you. Are you making a truth claim? If you are, you're rising above subjectivity and contradicting determinism. What is he talking about? How's that possible? How is that even possible? It doesn't make any sense. He'd have to explain it to me in more detail. Why truth claims? I guess what he's saying, let's see if I can make sense of that. I guess if you have a purely materialistic deterministic view, then claims that to truth, like what truth though? That things are determined? That, see, he just pulls that out of his hat like a little magic trick. Watch this. Flourish, sweep, and done. And that's it for you. I throw the question back in your face, and then I say, are you making a truth claim? Well, now that contradicts your belief in determinism. So you've self-contradicted yourself. I have you now. I'll tell you what, I doubt that guy was convinced that he was had. Wow, you really got me there. You're not allowed to ask this question. It's basically, you're not allowed to ask this question of the Bible. So I don't know what he meant by that, and I'm not going to try to unpack it. Maybe he had a point about, well, if you have a purely materialistic worldview, how can there be such a thing as truth? Well, in a sense, in a purely materialistic view, everything is true. Or, it's all true. Meaning, that which material is doing, I'm totally determined. So even my false beliefs are correct in a sense because they are determined by my material. So you can't have a true and false. Like everything is just as it ought to be and as it is. There is no idea of good or evil. There is no idea of true or false. It's all just what it is. It all is what it happens to be. And I see that point kind of because what I would say is that yeah, everything is as it should be. Everything, like it says in the scriptures, all things work together for good for those that love God, for those who are the called according to his purpose. And now that's part of the scripture I was going to cover. I wish I had done this slightly different. Let's see. Can I cheat? I wanted to put a window. I regret that I did not set up my scripture so I could be in the window with it. So I have this. Actually, I could do this. Let's go to study mode. And I'll just drop the scriptures into a nice little box here. I'm sorry. Transition. Okay. And we have my little box. And why is that up there? Huh. I think it'll get it. Okay. So now I want to address the scriptures. Let's just put it like that, because this is what I'm trying to do is not working, it's wasting time. You don't need to see my face. You've already seen it enough. Oh, okay, good. Now here we have Romans chapter 9. Romans 8 is actually where it says, I'm clicking on the screen instead of on my thing. Okay, Romans 9. Here we have the scripture I was talking about. And I've done this study 1,000 times, all right? But remember the guy's question. Let's listen to it really quick. Here's his original question, starting for 23 seconds.
Is how do we have, according to the Bible, how do we have free will if God is this omniscient being that knows everything about us, everything we will do, and he pretty much knows our outcome before we're even created. So he creates us knowing everything we'll do.
Is that true? Does God do that? Let's see. Romans 9, verse 11. There's a parenthetical part. For the children being not yet born, he's talking about Rebekah and her twin sons, Jacob and Esau, in her womb. For the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand. That means according to what God chooses, according to God's election. God is the one who elects. He's the one who makes decisions. Not of works, but of him that calleth. So the purposes of God are standing according to what he chooses and not according to what we do. And so when the children were not yet born, it was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger. So what this guy, the basis for his question is biblically based. Before you are born, God already knows everything about you. As it is written, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. This is before they were born. Before they had done anything. It was already determined that God's purposes might stand according to his election. So then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. Oh, that's verse 16. Verse 15, because he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Now let's read verse 17. For the scripture saith unto Pharaoh, even for the same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. Therefore hath he mercy on whom he will have mercy, and whom he will he hardens. Verse 19, thou wilt then say unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who has resisted his will? And is that not exactly what this guy asks?
Since we can't surprise him by our actions, we have no free will. Our choices have been predetermined, and that the act of judgment is completely immoral because he knows what we're going to do. Nothing can surprise him.
So he's saying, is then not the act of judgment immoral? It's a legitimate question. Right after it said, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated, it says, what shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done that. I was like thinking, I'm going to fix this. I'm like, I'm going to put a video capture right in there like this. Let's see if I can manage this without making it super boring. Da-da-da. All right, there we go. Cool. I just want to be in the frame. I don't know. It's probably stupid. There we go. Well, it's more engaging. You see the guy you're talking, who's talking to you. I like this. Okay. So, oh, you can't see it yet. There we go. I'm not I've only been doing this for about 4 or 5 months, so it's a bit new to me. So here we go. Excellent. Okay, everything's working. Good. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Is it unrighteous of God? He hates one, he loves the other. They haven't done anything wrong. So how is that morally accepted? Isn't that immoral? And what I would say to the guy, well, like what he said, maybe this is what Zacharias was getting at. Are you making a truth claim? I would say, are you making a moral claim? That once you talk about, is God righteous? Is God good or is God evil in judging the world? You're not talking about materialistic questions or pure subjectivity. You're saying there is an objective truth to the world. There's an objective truth. But I am determined. I am biologically determined. I am determined by my circumstances. I am a creature trapped in this world. And though from my subjective perspective, it feels like I have the ability to make choices, I can scratch my head. But God knew I was going to do that, but I didn't know I was going to do that. So from down here, I feel free. And it's almost wrong to say I'm not. You know what I mean? Because, well, but it was determined you were going to scratch your head. But I'm not all-knowing. So I don't understand like how I interface with that idea. Like, how can I interface with the idea of that? It's a problem. I don't have the right perspective. I don't have God's perspective. I am not God. I am not all-knowing. I cannot see the end from the beginning. I cannot see what I'm going to do before I do it. So it's all spontaneous to me from my subjective perspective. So also the moral thing, the moral question is all subjective to me. Like how I feel about it. But if I talk about God, now I'm talking about something objective. Like, is God justified in doing this? Is an objective question. Can God be justified in judging me even though he already knows what I'm going to do? In fact, you could say that his purpose made me into what I am and essentially determined that I would do the things I do. That Pharaoh would do the things he would do, that Esau would do the things he would do. We were judged before we did them and before we were even made. Before we came into being, it was known to God. So, why does he yet find fault? How can he judge me? For who is, I can't resist him. I can't resist the power of God's determinate counsel and foreknowledge. I can't resist it. I am who I am. I can't be somebody else. I can't be somewhere else. I'm here. I'm stuck here. I can move into the future uncertainly. I don't know where this path is going. I may walk out my door and get run over by a car. Or I might just be sitting here right now and a car just comes careening off the road and just destroys me. I'm not master of my destiny. How can he judge me? How can he slay me? And what's Paul's answer? And some people say he copped out. He did not cop out. Zacharias copped out. He copped out. Apostle Paul doesn't cop out. And I'll tell you why, because people don't analyze this properly. He says, "Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God?" Now, people say, like, who are you to reply against God? Yes, but that's not really the point. Who am I? Who am I that is replying? Who am I? Who am I? Not just in comparison to God, like of magnitude, but who am I? Who am I? What does he say next? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Well, they do. When he asks a question like that, what he's saying is there's something wrong with asking that. What's wrong with asking that question? Why did you make me thus? And this is the reply of God. It would be the reply of God. So says the Holy Spirit, which I have in me. This is what God says to that question. Would you rather I had made someone else in your stead? I could make another one in your stead to fulfill the exact same role you fulfill in my purpose and plan. I could make another being that would serve, but I made you. I have a study I'm going to put up on this thing. It used to be on my other channel. I'm closing all the studies down on my other channel pretty soon, called The Parable of the Worker's Wages. It's an extremely important parable. God is absolutely fair. That's the way he sees himself. That's his perspective on himself. It's not that he's unjust. Far from it. He is the absolute objective standard of what justice is. See, if there is objectivity in the universe, if there is true objectivity, it's only in God. He's the only being that occupies a purely objective position because he's all-knowing. So he sees everything objectively as it is. So he is the only one fit to judge. If God judges me, if God makes me and says, okay, I'm going to make Paul, and he's a scumbag, and I'm going to destroy him, I'm going to make him. My only thing is like, thank you for making me, because I know you hate me, and you'd probably rather I didn't exist. But for some reason, you brought me into this world and allowed me to live and breathe and enjoy pleasure. And I have all four of my limbs. I've lived a life. I've lived 45 years on this planet. And despite all the troubles and problems I've had, it's actually been it's been an experience. And before I had this, I had nothing. I had no experience. I had no consciousness. So thanks for making me, even though I am perhaps created to be destroyed. That God, how does God judge me faulty? How does he find fault with me, even though he created me faulty? Well, because I'm faulty, and because he made me, and because he knows what I am. He has a purely objective perspective on me. He knows the object with which he made. He is the potter. I am the clay. Boom, boom, boom. Here it is. What is it? A vessel of honor or a vessel of dishonor? God only knows what I was made for. Maybe I was made for good purposes. Maybe I was made and says, like, you know what, I'm going to make this guy, he's going to have a rough go of it, but he's going to come around and I'm going to speak to him. And I'm going to give him good things. And I'm going to teach him and I'm going to interact with him and I'm going to actually raise him from the dead and make him live forever. And the other guy says, well, wait a second. Why don't I get to do that? Well, when I made you, I didn't make something that was going that way. I made something that I hate, like Esau. And say, well, that's not fair. No, it's more than fair. It's generous. When God makes people he hates, he is being generous. Generous to them. If he makes you and he hates you, that's his generosity. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you have a party and what do? You invite your friends. God made a party and he invited all kinds of people, good and bad. So it's like the parable of the wedding feast. Furnish the wedding with guests. Bring them all in, good and bad. And then he finds one in there. He knew he asked bad and good, but he had not a wedding garment on. He was disrespectful to the one who's throwing the party. And he says, bind him hand and foot, get him out of here. Actually, I don't know if he told him to bind him hand and foot. But cast him out. There shall be weeping and grinding. They shall weep and grind. Because you despise the Creator. It's like, but I was created to despise the Creator. I know. How unfortunate. How terrible for you. Is that really true, though? This is where I preach the gospel. I mean, is it really you were created for destruction, or were you created to hear the gospel? Can you hear the gospel if it's preached to you? Can you hear the truth if it's preached to you? Or are you, as Berlinski said, just exercising your intellectual, you're just going through an exercise in contempt. You hate God. You hate being at his mercy. That's what it is, because you're at the mercy of God. You're in his world. You don't like it. You think somehow you can convict the objective God of the universe of some sort of guilt of you. You object to the world the way it is ordered. You think you're the first person to do that. You think you're somehow worthy to live forever. If you want to live forever, the first thing you got to accept is you're not worthy to live forever. If you want the mercy of God, first thing you got to recognize is that you are not worthy of his mercy. And if he should listen to the parable of the worker's wages, not just listen, I have a video, you can watch it. God is not fair. God is generous. That's how God sees himself. I mean, with some people he is at the very least fair. I mean, at the very least. Meaning to the person who is on the lowest, who received the worst thing that can happen to a human being, the worst thing is God being fair. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. God is fair. Like if God says to me, Paul, I'm going to put my Holy Spirit into you. And then not that he actually said that to me, but if he says to himself, I'm going to put my Holy Spirit in Paul. I'm going to teach him. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to bring him to everlasting life. If he says that, he's being generous. I can't justify it. I can't explain it. It's a little embarrassing. I don't even like talking about that thought. But it's in the Bible. The Bible addresses this. And like many places. It's the funny thing is, that's the thing that gets me, is like Zacharias slimily stepped around the question. The question's in the Bible. It's right there. And it's sort of like here in verse 22. What if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? He endures you. You hate him. You despise him. You hate the people who believe in him. You hate the reality he has created. You hate existence. And he endures you. He hates you. My next album is called I Love, Therefore I Hate. Because God loves and he hates. He doesn't love everybody. He hates some people like Esau. It says in black and white there, I hate Esau. Well, that's so heavy, man. What are you going to do with that? God hates some people. Does he hate me? Well, I'll tell you what. I wouldn't approach God with that belief. I would come to him in faith and say, I'm going to believe instead that you love me. I'm going to believe that you have good things waiting for me. And I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust in your mercy. I'm going to believe that you are merciful. And if I humble myself and come to you for mercy, I can find it. Or you can just maintain your superiority and say like, well, I don't believe in God. There is no God. You can comfort yourself with those words and then bitterly, and then say, and religious people and blah, 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 and go after it and say, it's not justifiable. It's justifiable. It's justifiable. Your destruction is the most just thing in the universe. Even say those who follow materialism to its ultimate conclusion where it ought to take you, which is to complete nihilism and self-destructiveness. If you follow it, like the Columbine shooters, like all the most destructive evil men in history had that hatred for God as part of their motivating force, a hatred for existence. Maybe they didn't center it on God consciously, but they hated existence and they wanted to destroy people and themselves. They wanted to judge the world. They judged the world. It's unfair. The brats. Anyways, so, like I said, I keep mentioning that workers' wages. Let me just quickly unpack that real fast. And I will reference you to that. Matthew chapter 20, Jesus tells a parable. There's a guy, he goes out, he hires people in the morning, and they agree with him for a penny for the whole day. And then he goes throughout the rest of the day, every couple hours he hires more people, and he says, I'll pay you whatever's fair. Or whatever's right, or whatever. The end of the day comes, and he starts paying them, and he starts off by paying the people who only worked an hour the same thing he agreed to pay the people who worked like 12 hours. They worked 12 hours the whole day. They put in a 12-hour shift, and they agreed to work for a certain amount of money. And then people who he had hired just an hour before closing time, there was a field they were harvesting. People he hired, and the last hour he gave them what he told the people they would be who worked all day they would be getting. And what happened is, and he paid everyone this. And people always get confused by this. They think it says, well, everyone gets the same thing. It's like, no. They didn't get the same thing. They got something they didn't earn. They didn't earn that full day's work wages. They didn't earn it. The people who worked all day, they got what they earned. And that's all they got. And they were bitter and resentful when they got it. And he says, you made them equal to us. And he says, I have done you no wrong. I have done you no wrong in giving you exactly what you deserve. Don't come to me and tell me I'm unjust. Your eye is evil because I'm good. I'm generous. I'm kind. Even to people like you who are ungrateful and despise me and despise the world I have made and the good things I have given you. And because what? There's toil in it, there's hardship, and everything isn't just perfect like you wish it was. It's like, I have my own purposes and plans. And they actually include you. And you got to be part of this. Here is your penny. Take it and go your way. I will give unto these, even as I give unto you, I will do as I please. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with what belongs to me? The whole world belongs to God, and he does with it what he pleases. And if you don't like it, too bad. You can either get on board, and that can be your destiny, because you don't know what your destiny is. Congratulations. You may think God hates you, but he might really love you. And the key to getting that is to start believing it right now and get on board. Or you can just wallow in self-destructive martyrdom and have your intellectual feelings of superiority. I know that God doesn't exist, and you can do all that garbage and impress your friends and whatever. Okay, but to say, Ravi Zacharias, you shouldn't have done what you did. You threw it back at the guy's face. It's a legit question. The Bible answers it, and I don't like his take on it. All he did was a flourish at the end and blah blah blah. No good. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. It's a little different than what I normally do. I will do more stuff like this. I just got to find videos that I find worth commenting on. If you like this, well, I usually do this. I suggest you subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. I should have done this a long time ago. Click on the like button. Leave a comment below. Especially if you like videos like this. Because I'm going to do more of them, whether you like it or not, because that's just what I do. I have a website. I have older studies. I have a musician. I have songs and more stuff. And there's my other YouTube channel. If you have a specific question, you can actually send that to me through this address, or you can send it to me through the comments or other ways, but I don't always see what's in the comments. So because YouTube doesn't do a good job notifying me, or I don't totally trust it. You know what I mean? Like, they don't always tell you what's up. So let's see. That's it. Thank you for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again sometime real soon. Let's get some outro music here. All right, we'll just transition. And here we go.